It happened on a Tuesday evening, the kind of quiet night that usually slips between the pages of a life without leaving a crease. I was sitting on the couch, half watching the news, half thinking about nothing at all, when she walked in. The soft click of her heels on the floor was the first thing I noticed. The second was the way she held her chin a little higher than usual, almost as if she were stepping into a room made of strangers. Then I saw it. The necklace. A thin, delicate chain glinting against her collarbone, catching the warm lamplight in a way that made it look almost alive. A pendant, simple, elegant, unfamiliar. She never wore jewelry. Almost never. And certainly not something like this. She gave me a soft smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes, and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. I must have stared too long, because she touched the pendant lightly, as if reminding herself it was there. I asked where it came from, not accusingly, not even suspiciously, just curious. She shrugged, too quickly, too casually. Said she found it in an old box somewhere, hadn't worn it in years, didn't know why she put it on. Her voice trembled just a little at the end, but she covered it with a laugh. Then she changed the subject, dinner, work, something about a coworker, all spoken in a rush of words designed to distract. And I let her. At least for that moment, I let her. But later, when she leaned down to kiss my cheek and I caught the faintest trace of a perfume I didn't recognize, soft, floral, expensive, the quiet part of my mind stirred and whispered something I didn't want to hear. She went to bed early. She always does on the days she's lying. I stayed on the couch, replaying the scene in my head, her raised chin, the quick shrug, the nervous laugh. And always, the necklace. It wasn't the kind of thing someone simply found in a box. No, it looked like something chosen, given and cherished. Something with a story attached. A story she wasn't ready for me to hear. And even before I touched it, before I knew what was hidden on the inside of that pendant, something in my chest tightened with a strange, unfamiliar fear. Because in all our years together, I had never seen anything that beautiful on her. And I hadn't given it to her. The next morning should have felt ordinary. She brewed her usual coffee. I packed my things for work. But there was something different in the air, something quietly off balance, like a picture frame tilted just enough to bother you if you looked too closely. She moved around the kitchen lightly, almost floating, but her hand kept drifting toward the necklace as if it steadied her. When she reached up to adjust it, her sleeve slipped just enough for me to see the faint outline where the pendant pressed against her skin. As though she'd been wearing it longer than she claimed. I tried not to stare, but I found myself tracing her every motion, trying to catch a glimpse of familiarity in the way she held herself. Instead, I saw only distance wrapped in silence. It's strange how suspicion doesn't arrive like thunder. It doesn't shout. It doesn't break the door down. It creeps in quietly, slipping through the seams of routines, settling in the gaps between moments. It makes you notice things you never paid attention to. Like how she hummed a song I'd never heard before while buttering toast. Or how she avoided turning fully toward me, as if afraid the necklace would catch the light and reveal something she wasn't ready to say. On her way out the door, she pressed a quick kiss to my cheek, the kind meant to reassure, not to connect. The chain brushed against my jaw. It was colder than her lips. After she left, the house fell into an unnatural stillness. Her coffee cup sat on the counter, leaving a small ring of warmth behind. I stared at that cup longer than I should have, the way someone watches evidence at a crime scene, knowing they won't like the truth behind it. The necklace lingered in my mind like a loose thread I couldn't stop pulling. I told myself it was nothing, a forgotten item from her past, an innocent accessory rediscovered in a moment of nostalgia. But beneath that hopeful reasoning lay something restless and uneasy. Because she didn't wear jewelry. She never had. And even if she did. Women don't forget gifts like that. Not the real ones. Throughout the rest of the morning, the memory of her shrug replayed in my head, casual, practiced, too smooth. A performance instead of an explanation. Suspicion had found its way in. And now it refused to leave. It wasn't until the following evening that I finally held the necklace in my hands. She had left it on the dresser, not carelessly, but deliberately, the way someone places an object where it can be seen without seeming hidden. As if she wanted it close but didn't want to be caught protecting it. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the way the faint bedroom light glimmered across the chain. It looked fragile, almost weightless, yet it carried a presence that felt heavier than anything she had worn in years. I told myself I shouldn't touch it. That it would be an invasion. That trust required restraint. But trust wasn't what I was feeling anymore. So I picked it up. The chain slid across my fingers like cool silk, and the pendant rested in my palm with a surprising warmth, as though it had absorbed her skin, her pulse, her hidden moments. It wasn't new, the metal had a softness to its shine, the kind that only comes with time and wear. This wasn't a forgotten trinket from a dusty box. This was something lived in. I turned it over, letting the pendant catch the light at different angles. And then I saw it faint, almost invisible unless you were truly looking for it. A word. A name. Engraved along the inner curve. Not her name. Not mine. A nickname intimate, specific, too personal to be innocent. The kind of name that carries a history in just a few letters. My stomach tightened in a way I didn't recognize, not anger, not jealousy, but something quieter, deeper. A realization that felt like stepping onto ice you thought was solid, only to hear it crack beneath your weight. It wasn't just the engraving. It was the tenderness of it. The softness in the script. The unmistakable intention behind it. And most of all, the knowledge that this name had never passed my lips. Not once. I tried to imagine her wearing it before. In the years before me. In moments I'll never know, with someone whose hands had fastened the clasp behind her neck. Someone who whispered that name with familiarity, someone whose presence still lingered in small, invisible ways. Suddenly, so many little things made sense, the perfume I didn't know, the distant way she looked at old memories, the softness in her eyes that seemed to belong to somewhere else. I closed my fist gently around the pendant. This wasn't just jewelry. It was a message. A memory made of metal and silence. And it had never been meant for me. After finding the engraving, something inside me shifted, not dramatically, not with an explosion of emotion, but with a slow, sinking heaviness that made everything in the house feel unfamiliar. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't even ask a question. Instead, I placed the necklace exactly where I found it and pretended nothing had changed. But everything had. The next days felt like walking through fog, each moment slightly distorted. She moved through our routines with the same practiced ease, humming softly as she cooked, brushing her hair back the same way she always did, leaving her coffee cup in the exact same place each morning. But there was an invisible texture to her movements now, a tension under the surface, a guardedness that felt newly exposed in the glow of what I had discovered. My investigation didn't begin with searching through drawers or checking her phone. It began with watching. Quietly, subtly, like someone studying the edges of a painting to understand the whole. I noticed how she touched the necklace when she thought she was alone, gently, almost reverently, her fingers lingering on the pendant as if the metal itself carried warmth. I noticed how she tucked it under her shirt when I entered a room, as though hiding not the object, but the expression it brought out of her. I began looking through the house for the old box she mentioned. Not tearing things apart, just observing. The storage closet, the bedroom drawers, the hallway cabinet, all unchanged, all undisturbed. No boxes moved. No dust patterns disrupted. No signs that she had rummaged through anything in years. Her story had cracks. The object was speaking louder than her words. One afternoon, while she showered, her coat hung by the door. The scent clinging to the collar was that same unfamiliar perfume I noticed before, not strong, just a whisper of something floral and foreign. I leaned closer, trying to identify it, but it wasn't a perfume she owned. I knew that now with certainty. She had worn it recently. For someone, or because of someone. The realization settled into my chest like cold air creeping into a warm room. It didn't accuse her outright. It didn't confirm anything. It just existed, a truth without a voice, waiting for me to acknowledge it. By the end of the week, I felt like a man studying a stranger's life from inside his own home. Tiny details had become magnified, the way she kept her phone face down, the glaze in her eyes when she stared at nothing, the way she hesitated before answering innocent questions. None of it screamed betrayal. Yet all of it whispered something else, something older, quieter, carved into metal and hidden under her collar. I wasn't searching for proof. I wasn't trying to catch her. I was trying to understand the shape of the absence growing between us, an absence that had been there long before I discovered the necklace. And I was beginning to realize it wasn't just something she was hiding. It was someone. In the days that followed, the necklace began to pull me backward as much as it pushed me forward. It was strange how a single object could fracture time, how the sight of it resting against her skin could make me think of years we had already lived through, years that now felt softer, dimmer, filtered through a haze of doubt. I found myself drifting into memories without meaning to. Small scenes replayed themselves with a clarity that felt almost cruel. The way she used to slip her hand into mine without thinking. The warmth of her laugh when I surprised her with flowers. The quiet nights we spent cooking together, dancing between the stove and the counter like it was the most natural thing in the world. Back then, she seemed fully present. Her eyes were bright, open, certain. When she looked at me, I never questioned who she was seeing. But now, I wasn't sure. Memory is a deceptive thing. It can comfort, or it can haunt. In my case, it did both. I remembered her wearing cheap bracelets and mismatched earrings, never anything delicate or sentimental like the necklace. She didn't like jewelry, she said. Thought it felt heavy. Thought it made her feel like someone she wasn't. Yet when I pictured her with that pendant, touching it gently, almost protectively, I realized something unsettling. She didn't look like the woman I married in those moments. She looked like someone else entirely. Someone she had once been. Someone she had shared with another man. And maybe she missed that version of herself, the version he had known. That thought lodged itself deep within me, like a splinter just beneath the skin. I found myself wondering about the man whose nickname was engraved inside the pendant. What he meant to her. Who she became when she was with him. Whether he had loved her in ways I never could, or simply in ways I no longer did. One night, unable to sleep, I opened an old photo album, the one from our first years together. I studied her face in picture after picture. There was joy, yes. There was affection. But there was also something missing that I had never seen until now, the softness she wore when she touched the necklace. A quiet tenderness I had mistaken for something she had simply outgrown. It had never belonged to me. Not then. And not now. The more I remembered, the more the distance between us began to reveal itself, not as something new, but as something that had always been waiting beneath the surface, patient and silent. The necklace didn't create that distance. It only illuminated it. And the woman beside me, humming softly as she chopped vegetables, brushing past me without really touching, felt like a person who was slowly slipping back into a life she had never fully moved on from. A life where I didn't exist. It was astonishing how quickly small things began to stand out once I knew what to look for. Or maybe they had always been there, unnoticed, overlooked, buried beneath the comfort of routine. Either way, the subtle changes became patterns, and the patterns became unsettling truths. She started wearing her hair differently, looser, softer, the way she used to in old photos from before we met. I found a new bottle of perfume tucked inside her drawer, its scent unmistakably matching the one lingering on her coat. She claimed it was a sample from a coworker, but she avoided meeting my eyes when she said it. Her posture changed, too. She carried herself with a strange blend of fragility and protectiveness, like someone holding onto a secret that was both precious and painful. When she thought I wasn't looking, she let her fingers drift to the necklace, grazing the pendant with a tenderness that felt almost intimate. But the moment she sensed my gaze, her hand fell to her side as if burned. She became quieter. Not distant exactly, but inward. Her smile dulled at the edges. Conversations grew shorter, lighter, shallow enough to avoid anything that could ripple the surface. She laughed less. And when she did, it sounded distant, like a sound she was borrowing from someone else's life. At night, she began turning away from me in bed, curling onto her side with her back exposed. Some nights she fell asleep clutching the necklace in her hand, the chain peeking out from under her pillow as if she needed to keep it close even in her dreams. More often, I noticed her disappearing into the bedroom with her phone, the door left slightly ajar but not enough for me to see inside. She would sit on the edge of the bed, the glow of the screen lighting her face, her expression soft, wistful even. As though she were reading something meant for another version of herself. And then there were the silences. They came unexpectedly, in the middle of everyday tasks. We would be cooking dinner, walking to the car, folding laundry, and suddenly, a shadow would pass over her. A stillness would settle. She would stand there, unmoving, her eyes drifting far away, as though she were momentarily stepping back into a memory I didn't belong to. She didn't seem unhappy. That was the strangest part. She wasn't angry with me, or cold, or resentful. She was simply elsewhere. Caught between two versions of herself, hovering in a place where I could not reach her. Every small change felt like a clue in a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. Each detail whispered a truth she wasn't saying, that the necklace meant more than she admitted, that it was tied to someone she hadn't let go of, someone who had left a mark deeper than the engraving inside the pendant. I watched these changes quietly, feeling something inside me tighten with each passing day. She wasn't slipping away from me. She was returning to someone she had once been. And someone she had once loved. Eventually, the quiet observing became unbearable. There comes a moment when silence feels heavier than truth, when pretending not to notice starts to bruise the heart more than whatever confession might follow. I reached that moment on a Sunday morning, the kind of morning that should have been simple: sunlight on the kitchen tiles, the smell of coffee, the soft hum of routine. She stood by the sink, drying a glass, her hair falling around her shoulders in that loose, unfamiliar way she'd adopted lately. The necklace rested just below her collarbone, catching the light with a soft metallic gleam. She touched it absent-mindedly, the way someone might soothe themselves without realizing. I watched her for a moment, feeling the weight of the week settle against my ribs. Then I spoke, not sharply, not angrily, but with a quiet steadiness that surprised even me. I mentioned the necklace again. I asked about the box she claimed to have found it in. I asked whether it meant something to her. She paused. Completely. Her hand froze mid-air, the dish towel dangling loosely between her fingers. She didn't turn to face me. She didn't speak. She remained absolutely still, as though she had been caught in a moment she had rehearsed avoiding. When she finally answered, her voice was too smooth, too controlled. She repeated the same explanation: an old box, forgotten jewelry, nothing important. But her tone had changed. It was softer, almost fragile, wrapped in a tension she couldn't quite hide. I told her I had seen the engraving. She stiffened, the towel slipping from her hand onto the counter. For a heartbeat, I saw something flicker across her face, not guilt exactly, but sorrow. Deep, aching sorrow. Still, she didn't offer an explanation. She didn't ask what the engraving said. She didn't even ask why I looked. Instead, she said nothing. Her silence was not defensive. It was protective. Like she was shielding something, a memory, a person, a version of herself I had never met. The silence stretched between us, delicate and sharp at the same time, like a thread pulled too tight. I realized then that I was confronting not just a hidden truth, but a part of her life she had locked away long before I came into it. A part she wasn't willing or able to share. And that hurt more than any confession could have. She finally whispered that I was overthinking, that I was making meaning where there was none. But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Her fingers curled around the pendant with a tenderness that contradicted every word she said. I didn't push further. It was clear she wouldn't give me answers. Maybe she didn't know how. The confrontation ended not with clarity, but with the soft sound of her footsteps leaving the kitchen. She didn't look back. She walked to the bedroom, closed the door quietly, and left me standing there with nothing but the echo of her silence. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a confession. It was something in between. A truth suspended in air. Too heavy to fall. Too fragile to touch. After that quiet, unfinished confrontation, something shifted between us in a way that felt irreversible. Nothing dramatic happened, no argument, no slammed doors, no accusations thrown into the air. Instead, what grew was distance, the subtle kind that doesn't announce itself but settles quietly into every room. She moved around the house like a guest rather than a partner. Her footsteps softened. Her voice lowered. Her presence thinned. Even when she stood right beside me, there was a sense that she was somewhere else entirely, living parallel to me rather than with me. We stopped brushing against each other in the hallway. We stopped lingering at the table after meals. We stopped laughing at the tiny, ridiculous things that used to stitch our days together. It wasn't a coldness at least has edges you can feel. This was emptiness. A gentle withdrawal, so subtle it would have been invisible if I weren't watching so closely. Sometimes I found her staring at nothing, her fingers lightly grazing the pendant as though comforting herself. Other times she sat on the edge of the bed with a distant expression, like she was listening for a voice only she could hear. When I walked into the room, she would straighten, smile faintly, and pretend she had simply been thinking. She wasn't thinking. She was remembering. The realization came slowly, in fragments. I began to understand that I was not losing her to another man, at least, not in the present. I was losing her to a memory, to a version of herself she had tucked away, one tied to that necklace, that nickname, that invisible history she carried like a bruise beneath her skin. I tried to close the distance. I reached for her hand during a movie, but she withdrew it gently, as if startled. I offered to cook her favorite meal, but she barely tasted it. I touched her shoulder one night, and she flinched, not from fear, but from sorrow, as if my touch pulled her away from where she wanted to be. We slept back to back now. Not from anger, from disconnection. Sometimes, in the quiet hours just before dawn, I would wake to find her sitting upright in bed, the pendant dimly reflecting the first hints of morning light. Her eyes always looked tired, reddened, as though she'd been crying long before I opened my eyes. She never said why. I never asked. It felt like talking would shatter something delicate, not just between us, but inside her. So I let the silence grow, even as it wrapped around the both of us like thick fog. We lived in the same house, but in different emotional climates. And all the while, the necklace remained at the center of it. A small, polished piece of metal holding a truth she would not speak. An anchor to a past she had never really left. The space between us didn't widen through conflict. It widened through quiet, shared heartbreak. Hers for a memory she wasn't ready to let go of. And mine for the version of her I was losing. Inch by silent inch. It happened slowly, like watching a photograph develop in reverse, colors fading, shapes softening, outlines dissolving until only the shadow of what once was remained. I began to understand the truth of the necklace not through words, but through the quiet way she carried it, the tenderness with which she held it, the ache she tried, and failed, to hide. This wasn't about infidelity. Not the kind people whisper about. Not something physical, or recent, or impulsive. It was older. Deeper. Rooted in a version of her life I had never been invited into. The realization hit me one evening when I watched her standing by the window, her silhouette outlined by the fading sunset. She reached for the necklace again, fingers brushing the pendant with almost ceremonial gentleness. Her expression wasn't guilty. It was mournful. Soft. Almost reverent. And suddenly, all the pieces aligned in the quietest, most devastating way. She wasn't hiding an affair. She was holding on to a grief. A grief shaped like a man I had never met. A grief sealed inside that engraved nickname. I thought about the way she looked when she touched the pendant, the faraway softness in her eyes, the silent tightening of her jaw, the faint tremor of emotion in her breath. That was not the look of someone rekindling something forbidden. It was the look of someone remembering a goodbye that had never healed properly. She had told me once, years ago, that everyone has a version of themselves they leave behind at some point, a past self shed quietly, like a skin. I'd assumed she'd meant it metaphorically. Now I saw the truth, she had left behind a life, a person, a love she hadn't fully released. And maybe she never meant to. Maybe she didn't know how. The necklace wasn't a gift from another man meant to replace me. It wasn't evidence of betrayal. It wasn't even a secret lover reclaimed. It was a relic from a chapter she had never truly closed. A symbol of who she had been, who she had loved, and who she had lost. I thought back to the changes, the perfume, the hairstyle, the distant expression. These weren't signs of someone straying. They were signs of someone slipping backward, searching for a version of herself she had buried too deeply. I finally understood. She wasn't choosing someone else over me. She was choosing a memory over herself. And there is no confronting a memory. No arguing with it. No winning against it. All you can do is stand quietly at the edges of someone's past and accept that part of them was never yours and never will be. The necklace wasn't the beginning of the truth. It was the mirror reflecting what had always been there. A love she lost. A piece of herself she missed. A reminder she couldn't let go of. And me, the man who had been loving only half of her without even knowing it. In the final days before I made my decision, I found myself studying her the way one studies a fading photograph, memorizing the outline of a person who was already halfway gone. She moved through the house softly, her fingers always drifting toward the pendant as though checking that it hadn't vanished, as though losing it would mean losing the last remaining thread of a life she still lived inside her mind. I didn't confront her again. There was nothing left to confront. The truth wasn't in her actions or her words, it was in the quiet devotion she gave to something I could never compete with, a memory, polished smooth by years of longing and regret. A version of love that required nothing from her but remembrance. One evening, after she had fallen asleep facing the wall, the necklace glimmered faintly against the pillow. For a long moment, I simply watched her breathe, her hand curled protectively near the pendant. There was no betrayal in her face. Only sorrow. Only distance. I realized then that the hardest part of loving someone is accepting the parts of them you can never reach. So I did the only thing that felt honest. The next morning, I placed the necklace on the dresser, not where she had left it, but centered neatly, as if presenting it back to the life she missed. I packed quietly, not with anger or bitterness, but with a kind of tired clarity. Leaving wasn't a punishment. Staying would have been. When she came out of the bedroom and saw the empty spaces where my things had been, she didn't call out. She didn't chase me down the hall. She simply stood there, her hand lifting to her chest instinctively, only to touch skin where the necklace had once been. I walked out without a dramatic goodbye, without slamming doors, without breaking the fragile quiet between us. Some endings don't need noise. They just need truth. And as I stepped outside, I felt something loosen in my chest, something that had been tightening for weeks, maybe years. It wasn't relief exactly. It was release. I didn't leave because of the necklace. I left because I finally understood what it symbolized. A love she lost. A self she mourned. A story I couldn't rewrite. And sometimes, the most honest way to love someone is to stop asking them to be someone they no longer are.